The Arizona sun did not shine so much as it struck, a heavy, physical blow that made the air shimmer above the red earth. Inside the stagecoach, the heat was a living thing, thick with the smell of old leather, sweat, and the pervasive, powdery dust that coated the back of Evelyn Reed's throat. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, trying to filter the air, but the grit was inescapable. It settled in the creases of her dark traveling dress and dulled the shine of her boots. In Boston, the air had been gray, heavy with the scent of rain and the acrid tang of ink from her father's printing press. Boston was cobblestones, polite society, and the suffocating corset of expectation. Boston was also a graveyard now, holding the fresh markers of her parents, taken by the influenza that had swept through the city in the winter of 1884. Evelyn closed her eyes against the glare outside the window. At 24, she was considered by her aunt to be firmly on the shelf, a spinster with ink-stained fingers and too many opinions. But she was not a spinster. She was a woman who had just inherited a future. The letter from the solicitor had been vague, speaking of a parcel of land in the Arizona Territory left to her by an eccentric uncle she had barely known. Of little improved value, the letter read. But to Evelyn, it read as freedom. She had sold the press, packed her trunks, and bought a ticket west, chasing a horizon that never seemed to end. "Look at that, miss," the driver called out, his voice rough from years of swallowing sand. Evelyn leaned forward, the wooden frame of the window pressing into her ribs. The stagecoach was navigating a high ridge, and below them, the vastness of the territory unfolded like a crumpled quilt of ochre, rust, and sage green. Massive mesas rose flat-topped against a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. And then she saw them. In the distance, moving parallel to the coach but separated by a deep ravine, a group of riders navigated the rocky terrain. They were not cavalrymen in blue, nor were they cowboys in dusted denim. They rode with a fluidity that made horse and man appear as one creature. "Navajo," a fellow passenger muttered. A traveling salesman who had spent the last 3 hours clutching his sample case. "Should be on the reservation. The government is too soft." Evelyn ignored him, her gaze locked on the lead rider. Even from this distance, he commanded attention. He wore no hat, his dark hair held back by a band, and his posture was impossibly straight. He turned his head, and for a fleeting second, Evelyn felt a jolt, as if he could see her through the dusty window of the coach. He was a part of this landscape in a way she could never hope to be harsh, unyielding, and beautiful. The rider was Talon Yazzie, though she did not know his name yet. She only knew that the sight of him made the air in the coach feel suddenly thinner. The rider signaled, and the group turned, disappearing behind a wall of sandstone. Evelyn sat back, her heart beating a strange, erratic rhythm against her ribs. By the time the stagecoach rattled into Dust Mesa, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and bruised orange. Dust Mesa was less a town and more a temporary agreement between timber and desert. The buildings were raw wood. The main street was a river of dirt, and the sound of hammers rang out alongside the distant, rhythmic chugging of a steam engine. The railroad was coming, and the town was bracing for impact. Evelyn had barely stepped onto the boardwalk, dusting her skirts, when a man approached her. He looked out of place amidst the rough laborers and dusty cowboys. He wore a tailored gray suit that seemed impervious to the filth of the street, and a silk cravat was tied expertly at his throat. "Miss Reed, I presume," the man smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "I am Silas Crowell. Welcome to Dust Mesa." Evelyn adjusted her hat, wary. "You have the advantage of me, sir. I was not expecting a welcoming committee. News travels fast on the wire, and faster in a town this size," Silas said, offering his arm, which she politely declined. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, swept over her with a calculating coolness that made her skin prickle. "I represent the Union Pacific and Southern interests here. I understand you are the beneficiary of the late Jeremiah Reed's estate." "I am. A tragic loss," Silas said, his voice smooth as oil. "But perhaps I can make your transition easier. The land you inherited? Well, to be frank, misread. It is nothing but rock, rattlesnakes, and stubborn weeds. It is miles from civilization. However, it sits near a proposed supply route for our expansion. I would be willing to take it off your hands for a very generous sum. Say, $500. You could buy a ticket back to Boston and live quite comfortably. $500 was a fortune. It was security. It was the easy way out. But Evelyn looked at Silas Crowell, at the smug set of his jaw, and felt a surge of her father's stubbornness. I have traveled 2,000 miles, Mr. Crowell, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite her fatigue. I believe I should like to see my rocks and weeds before I sell them. The smile on Silas's face did not waver, but the temperature in his eyes dropped. Of course, sentimental value. I understand. But do not wait too long. Miss Reed, the desert is not kind to hesitation. He tipped his hat and walked away, his boots making sharp, authoritative clicks on the wooden planks. Evelyn found the office of Mr. Calloway tucked between a general store and a barber shop. The lawyer was a man made of wrinkles and parchment paper, looking as though he had been left out in the sun to dry for too long. He peered at her over spectacles that balanced precariously on the end of his nose. You are younger than I expected. Mr. Calloway grunted, shuffling papers on a desk that looked like a chaotic paper avalanche. And prettier. That is a disadvantage in this territory. I am here about the deed. Mr. Calloway, Evelyn said, taking the seat opposite him. Yes, the deed. He pulled a heavy document from a drawer. Your uncle was a strange man. I loved silence more than money. The land is located at the mouth of Red Rock Canyon. It is not just rocks. Miss Reed, it includes the only viable pass through the Vermilion Cliffs for 50 miles. Evelyn leaned forward. Is that why Mr. Crowell wants it? Crowell wants it because blasting a tunnel through the mountain would cost the railroad $2 million in 3 years of labor, Calloway said bluntly. Going through your canyon costs them pennies. But there is a complication. Which is the Navajo, Calloway said, removing his spectacles and rubbing his eyes. They call that canyon the breath of the ancestors. It is sacred ground. They have been pushed south, herded like cattle, but they still hold that canyon in their hearts. Your uncle let them move through it freely. He respected them. Crowell will not. Evelyn took the deed. The paper felt heavy, substantial. So, if I sell, the railroad destroys their sacred land. If you sell, you get rich and leave, Calloway countered. If you stay, you have a railroad baron and a tribe of warriors to contend with. Silas Crowell does not like the word no. He has men who ensure he never has to hear it. Leaving the lawyer's office, Evelyn felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. She checked into the only hotel in town, a 2-story structure with thin walls and a mattress that smelled of straw. Downstairs, the saloon was beginning to fill up as the work whistle blew at the rail yard. She needed water and perhaps a meal that wasn't dried beef. So she ventured into the common room, which served as both dining hall and gathering place. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. She found a small table in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. Conversations floated around her complaints about the heat, the low pay from the railroad, and darker mutterings about the Indian problem. Saw a group of them near the ridge today. A burly man with a thick beard spat, slamming his mug down. Should shoot them on sight. Thieves, a lot of them. Careful, Jed. Another man laughed nervously. Some of them served as scouts for the army. They know how to shoot back. A scout is just a traitor with a badge. Jed growled. Take that Yazzie fellow, Talon. Walks around like he owns the place just because he tracked Geronimo for the general. He's still just an Indian dog. The door to the saloon swung open, bringing in a gust of cooling evening air. The room went quiet, the silence spreading like a ripple in a pond. Talon Yazzie stepped inside, up close. He was even more imposing than he had been from the stagecoach window. He wore a mixture of traditional buckskin and white man's cotton shirt. The sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. A silver necklace with a heavy turquoise pendant rested against his chest. He carried a rifle in a leather scabbard across his back, but his hands were empty. He moved to the counter, placing a stack of cured wolf pelts on the wood. "Salt," Talon said, his voice a deep baritone that carried without shouting. "And 44 caliber rounds." The barkeep, a nervous man with a twitching eye, hurriedly began to count out the supplies. "We don't serve your kind here," Jed shouted from his table, emboldened by the whiskey. Talon did not turn. He did not acknowledge the man's existence. He simply waited for his trade. Jed pushed back his chair, the screech of wood on wood loud in the tense room. He staggered over to the bar, looming behind Talon. "I was talking to you, boy." Talon placed a coin on the counter to complete the transaction and gathered his box of ammunition. He turned to leave, his movement fluid and economical. Jed reached out, his dirty hand grabbing the silver necklace around Talon's neck. "Nice jewelry. Use that to pay for your whiskey." The violence happened so fast Evelyn almost missed it. Talon did not strike the man. He did not draw the knife at his belt. He simply pivoted, his hand coming up to lock onto Jed's wrist. With a subtle twist of his hips and a shift of weight, he spun the larger man around. Jed yelped as his arm was twisted up behind his back, forcing him to bend forward until his face was pressed against the rough wood of the bar. Talon stood behind him, calm, his breathing even. He leaned down, whispering something in Jed's ear that no one else heard. Then he released the man and stepped back. Jed stumbled, rubbing his shoulder, his face red with humiliation and rage. But he did not attack again. He had felt the steel in the other man's grip. Talon scanned the room, his dark eyes challenging anyone else to move. His gaze swept over the corner table and stopped. He looked at Evelyn. For the second time that day, their worlds collided. Up close, she saw the fine lines of hardship around his eyes, the intelligence that burned there. He was not the savage the men claimed he was. He was a man holding back a storm. He looked at her high-collared dress, her pale skin, her wide, startled eyes. There was no hatred in his look, only a profound, weary curiosity. Evelyn felt a flush rise from her neck to her cheeks. She felt exposed, not just as a woman, but as an intruder in a land she did not understand. She lowered her gaze, unable to sustain the intensity of his stare. But the image of him, powerful, restrained, and undeniably noble, burned into her mind. Talon turned and walked out into the twilight, the saloon doors swinging shut behind him. "You best stay clear of that one, miss," the barkeep muttered, wiping the counter where Talon had stood. "He walks between two worlds, and he doesn't belong to either." The next morning, Mr. Calloway found Evelyn at the livery stable. "Crowell is moving fast," the lawyer warned, leaning on his cane. "He has filed a petition claiming the land is abandoned. If you do not occupy it or prove intent to manage it within the week, the territory judge might grant him eminent domain." "Then I will go there," Evelyn said, adjusting the saddle on a rented mare. She had ridden horses in Boston, gentle park hacks, but the beast before her looked half wild. "I will ride out tomorrow. Alone, that is suicide," Calloway said. "Then find me a guide. But I am going miles away." In the shadow of the red cliffs, the air smelled of sage smoke and roasted mutton. Grandmother Nada sat by the fire, her hands weaving a basket with the dexterity of a woman half her age. She was the memory of the people, the keeper of stories. Talon sat across from her, cleaning his rifle. The metal gleamed in the firelight. "The iron snake is hungry," Grandmother Nada said, her voice sounding like dry leaves blowing over stone. "It wants to eat the mountain." "I know, Grandmother," Talon said. "Silas Crowell has brought more men, guns for hire." "And the woman?" Nada asked. "The one who comes from the place of rain." Talon paused, the rags stilling on the barrel of the gun. "She is just a white woman. She will sell." "They always sell. The land means nothing to them but numbers on a paper." Grandmother Nada shook her head slowly. She threw a handful of herbs into the fire, and the smoke rose in a straight, white column. "Do not be so sure, grandson. I have seen her in the smoke. She carries a heavy grief, But her eyes are honest. She does not know it yet, but her spirit is looking for a place to root. The land was given to her for a reason. She is weak, Talon said dismissively. I saw her at the watering hole. She looks like she would break in a strong wind. The willow bends where the oak breaks, Nada replied. You must watch her. Know her. If she is an enemy, we must know. If she is not, then the spirits have played a great joke on us all. Talon stood up, looking out toward the town lights flickering in the distance like fallen stars. He remembered the woman in the saloon, the way she had not looked away in disgust like the others, but in something else. Wonder, fear. I will watch, Talon promised. That night, the wind picked up. It started as a low moan, vibrating through the wooden slats of the hotel, before rising to a shriek. The sandstorm swallowed Dust Mesa. Evelyn lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sand scouring the window pane. It sounded like 1,000 tiny claws trying to get in. The oil lamp flickered on the bedside table, illuminating the deed she held in her hands. The legal language was dry, but the reality it represented was terrifying. She thought of Silas Crowell's cold smile and the threat beneath his velvet words. She thought of the lawyer's warning, and she thought of the warrior in the saloon, the man who moved like water and looked like stone. She was alone in a room that smelled of strangers, 2,000 miles from the grave of her parents, holding a piece of paper that men were willing to kill for. Fear curled in her stomach, cold and sharp. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a hum in her blood. Awoke, for the first time in her life. Evelyn Reed was not someone's daughter, or someone's potential wife. She was a woman holding the key to a canyon. Outside, the wind howled, tearing at the eaves, untying the ribbons of the night. It was a wild, violent sound, the sound of a world that did not ask for permission. Evelyn blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and clutched the paper to her chest. She did not know it yet, but the wind was already beginning to loosen the knots of her old life, preparing to strip away everything she thought she knew about herself. The storm raged on, burying the tracks of the railroad in deep drifts of red sand, erasing the line between civilization and the wild, waiting for morning to reveal the new shape of the world. The morning sun rose over Dust Mesa with a deceptive innocence, bleaching the wooden boardwalks white and promising a heat that would soon turn the air into a physical weight. Evelyn Reed stood outside the hotel, adjusting the brim of her hat against the glare. She wore a riding habit she had purchased in Boston, heavy navy wool that was entirely unsuited for the Arizona climate. Yet she refused to loosen the collar. It was her armor. Silas Crowell arrived on a chestnut mare that shone like a polished penny. He led a second horse, a spotted gelding that looked skittish, shifting its weight from hoof to hoof. Silas looked immaculate, his linen suit crisp, a sharp contrast to the dust that coated everything else in the territory. A fine morning for a survey, Miss Reed, Silas said, tipping his hat. His smile was easy, practicing the charm that had likely built half the rail lines east of the Mississippi. I thought we might ride out to the canyon rim. It is best if you see the difficulty of the terrain yourself. It might help you understand why my offer is so generous. I am ready. Mr. Crowell, Evelyn replied, though her stomach tightened as she mounted the gelding. She was a competent rider in a park setting, but this land felt untamed beneath her. They rode out of town, followed by two of Silas's men who lingered a respectful distance behind. The landscape opened up, vast and intimidating. The earth changed from the dusty brown of the town to a deep, iron-rich red. Scrubs of sagebrush clung to the dry soil, and in the distance, the vermilion cliffs rose like the walls of a fortress built by giants. You see, Silas said, gesturing with a gloved hand toward the jagged horizon. It is beautiful, I grant you, but it is unforgiving. Civilization cannot take root here without significant investment. Iron and steam. Miss Reed, that is the only way to tame this wilderness. That land of yours, it is nothing but stone and scorpion nests. The Navajo cling to it because they have nowhere else, but progress is inevitable. Mr. Calloway mentioned it was sacred to them, Evelyn said, keeping her voice neutral. Silas laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. Everything is sacred to a savage when a white man wants to buy it. Do not let their superstitions cloud your judgment. They are a conquered people. Miss Reed, it is sad, perhaps, but it is the way of the world. The strong build the future, the weak fade into history. Evelyn gripped her reins tighter. There was a cruelty in his philosophy that sat ill with her, a cold rationality that reminded her of the machines he worshipped. They were approaching a narrowing in the trail, where the rocks rose high on either side, creating a natural choke point. The air here was still, the silence heavy. Suddenly, a crack of thunder erupted from the ridge above. Though the sky was cloudless, dirt kicked up near the hooves of Silas's horse. "Ambush!" one of the guards shouted. More shots rang out, echoing off the canyon walls, amplifying the chaos. Silas wheeled his horse around, his face twisting from charm to fury. "Damn Navajo! Get back! Pull back!" Evelyn struggled with the gelding as it reared, terrified by the noise. She looked up toward the ridge. She saw figures on horseback, their faces covered with scarves, feathers tied to their manes. They were silhouetted against the sun, firing rifles into the air and at the ground near the horses. Something struck Evelyn as odd, even in her panic. The riders were on high ground with clear lines of sight. If they had wanted to kill Silas or his men, they could have done so easily. Instead, the bullets struck the rocks with a rhythmic precision, creating noise and dust but no blood. It felt less like an attack and more like a performance. "Ride, you fool!" Silas screamed at her, striking the flank of her horse with his crop. The gelding bolted. The world dissolved into a blur of red rock and blue sky. The group scrambled to retreat back toward the open desert. Then, a single, distinct shot rang out from a different direction lower, closer to the canyon floor. It grazed the flank of Evelyn's horse. The animal screamed, a high-pitched sound of terror, and bucked violently. Evelyn lost her stirrup. The saddle slipped. For a moment she was weightless, suspended in the dry air, before the ground rushed up to meet her. She hit the slope hard, rolling uncontrollably. Sky and earth tumbled over each other. She felt the sharp bite of shale against her cheek, the bruising impact of stone against her ribs. She tumbled over the edge of a steep incline, sliding down into a deep fissure hidden from the trail above. The last thing she heard was the fading thunder of hooves and Silas shouting something indistinguishable before darkness swallowed her. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by a throbbing ache in her temples and the sharp smell of crushed artemisia. Evelyn opened her eyes. The sky above was a deep, bruising purple. Evening had come. She was lying on a flat rock in a narrow ravine, sheltered from the wind by high sandstone walls. A figure was crouching beside her. She gasped and tried to sit up, but a firm hand pressed her shoulder back down. "Stay," a voice said. It was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of panic. Evelyn blinked, her vision clearing. It was the man from the saloon, Talon Yazzie. He was applying a poultice of chewed leaves to a gash on her forehead. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands that were calloused and scarred. He wore a simple cotton shirt, dust-stained, and his dark hair hung loose around his shoulders. "You," she whispered, her throat dry as parchment. Where is Mr. Crowell?" "Running," Talon said. He tied a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt around her head to hold the herbs in place. "He thinks you are dead, or he did not care enough to look down the ravine." Evelyn touched the bandage, wincing. "We were attacked. The Navajo." "Not Navajo," Talon corrected her. He sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a rag. "Navajo do not ride with McClellan saddles, and we do not waste ammunition shooting at clouds." Evelyn frowned, the memory of the ambush surfacing through the pain. They were masked. They had feathers. "Costumes," Talon said, his lip curling slightly in disdain. "Men hired by Crowell. I saw their boots, army issue, stolen or bought, and the way they rode, heavy in the seat, A Navajo rides with the horse. Those men rode on top of the horse. The implication settled over Evelyn like a cold shroud. You are saying Silas Crowell attacked his own party. He needs a reason to bring the soldiers, Talon explained, his eyes scanning the rim of the ravine above them. He needs the government to believe we are savages, killing innocent women. If you die, or if you are hurt by wild Indians, he gets his war. And with the war, he gets the land. He shot at us, Evelyn murmured, horror dawning. He put my life in danger for a headline. He did not shoot at you. He shot near you. To scare you, to make you sell. Talon looked at her, his expression unreadable. But the last shot, the one that hit your horse, that came from the rocks. Maybe a mistake. Maybe one of his men was too drunk to aim high. And you, Evelyn asked, meeting his gaze. Why are you here? I was tracking them. Talon said, I saw you fall. The rock slide covered you. They could not see you, so they ran. He reached for a canteen and offered it to her. Evelyn drank greedily, the water cool and metallic. When she lowered the canteen, she looked at him. Really looked at him. He was terrifyingly composed. Thank you, she said softly. Talon shrugged, a slight motion of one shoulder. Your horse is stupid. You are not, but you need to learn how to sit in a saddle. You ride like a sack of flour. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by the blunt criticism. A bubble of hysterical laughter rose in her chest, but she choked it down. I was trained in an English riding school, sir. This is not England, Talon said, capping the canteen. And the ground here is harder. The wind began to pick up, whistling through the narrow cracks in the canyon walls. The temperature was dropping rapidly, as it always did in the high desert. Talon stood, testing the air. A storm is coming, he said. A real one, not like the little dust yesterday. We cannot go back to town tonight. The trail will be blinded. We cannot stay here, Evelyn protested, trying to stand. Her ankles screamed in protest, and she stumbled. Talon caught her arm, steadying her effortlessly. We stay, or we die in the sand. There is a cave nearby. Can you walk? I have to, Evelyn gritted out. They moved slowly through the deepening twilight. Talon led the lame gelding which he had somehow retrieved while supporting Evelyn's weight. They reached a shallow cave recessed into the canyon wall just as the wind turned into a roar. Inside, it was dry and smelled of ancient earth. Talon built a small fire using dried scrub wood he had gathered. The flames cast long, dancing shadows against the rock walls. Evelyn huddled near the warmth, shivering. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a dull, aching anger. Silas Crowell, the man of progress, the man of civilization, was a monster. He had smiled at her while leading her into a trap. She watched Talon tending to the fire. Why did you help me? She asked. I am one of them. I am a white woman coming to take your land. Talon looked at her across the flames. The firelight turned his eyes into pools of obsidian. You are a woman alone in the desert. That is all. He paused, poking the fire with a stick. And the land, it is not yours to take, and not mine to give. It belongs to itself. He gestured to the wall behind her. Evelyn turned and gasped. Carved into the stone were spirals, figures of deer, and handprints. They were faded, ancient. The old ones left these, Talon said quietly. Long before the Spanish came, long before the Americans, my people have lived in the shadow of these cliffs for generations. We know where the water hides. We know when the wind speaks. He looked into the fire, his face tightening. When I was a boy, the soldiers came. Kit Carson. They burned our peach orchards. They killed our sheep. They made us walk hundreds of miles to Bosque Redondo. The long walk. Evelyn had read about it in the papers, briefly. A minor footnote about relocating hostels. Hearing it now, in this cave, it felt immediate and brutal. We walked. Talon continued, his voice devoid of self-pity, which made it all the more heartbreaking. The old ones died. The babies died. For 4 years we lived in a flat with bad water. When they let us come back, we promised to live by their laws. We signed their papers. He looked up at Evelyn. We are protected by the treaty, by the law. That is what the chiefs say. But I have learned something working for the army. The law is a turtle. It comes slowly, the gun and the train. They are rabbits. They arrive first. Evelyn pulled her knees to her chest. My father printed law books, she said softly. He believed in words. He believed that if you wrote something down, it made it true. Words are wind, Talon said, unless there is iron behind them. I came here to be free, Evelyn confessed, the words spilling out. In Boston, do you know what a corset is? Mr. Yazzie. Talon raised an eyebrow. I have seen the white women faint. I assume it is a cage you wear. It is, Evelyn said, touching her ribs. But the real cage is invisible. In Boston. I was just a daughter. Then I was an orphan. Then I was a spinster. I was property to be managed. When I got the letter about this land, I thought, finally, something that is mine. Something no one can tell me how to use. She looked at her hands, scraped and dirty. I did not know my freedom would cost you yours. Talon studied her. The firelight softened the hard angles of his face. You have a fire in you. Evelyn Reed. Most women would be crying for their mothers. You are angry. I am furious, she corrected him. Good, Talon said. Anger keeps you warm. Fear makes you cold. Outside, the storm raged, the wind screaming like a banshee. But inside the small cave, there was a quiet understanding growing between them. Evelyn looked at the man across the fire. He was the savage she had been warned about, yet he was the one who had bound her wounds and offered her warmth. Silas Crowell, the gentleman, had left her for dead to save a few miles of track. She realized then that the deed in her pocket was not just a title to rocks and weeds. It was the keystone. If she sold it, the railroad would punch through this canyon, shattering the silence, erasing the petroglyphs, and driving Talon's people further into the dust. If she sold, she could go back to Boston with $500 and live a comfortable, caged life. But if she kept it, she looked at the handprints on the wall. She looked at Talon, who was watching the cave entrance with the vigilance of a wolf. If she kept it, she would be standing against Silas Crowell, against the railroad, against her own society. She would be standing alone in a land that wanted to kill her. Talon, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He turned his gaze to her. If I keep the land, she said, her voice trembling slightly but her eyes clear. If I refuse to sell, what happens? Then you make a powerful enemy, Talon said grimly. And you start a war. Silas has already started the war, Evelyn said, her jaw setting in a line that reminded her of her father. He just didn't expect anyone to fight back. Talon looked at her for a long moment, searching for the lie, the hesitation. He found none. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. Sleep, he said, gesturing to the bed of saddle blankets he had arranged. Tomorrow, the sand will settle, and then we will see if your fight is as strong as your words. Evelyn lay down, the stone hard beneath her, the fire crackling nearby. She watched the shadows dance on the ceiling of the cave. She was bruised, lost, and hunted, but as she closed her eyes, she realized she felt more alive than she ever had in the parlor rooms of Boston. The wind outside was trying to tear the world apart, but in the center of the storm, she had found her footing. The virgin from the east had died on that slope. The woman who woke up was something else entirely. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving behind a blue so piercing it felt like a bell struck against the dome of the world. The air was cool, smelling of damp sage and the ozone tang of lightning that had long since grounded itself. Evelyn Reed stood at the edge of a high limestone shelf, the wind tugging at the hem of her ruined traveling dress. Beside her, Talon Yazzie stood like a statue carved from the same red rock that dominated the landscape. Look, Talon said, pointing downward. Evelyn stepped closer to the edge, fighting a wave of vertigo. Below them, the world fell away into the Red Rock Canyon. From the lawyer's map in town, it looked like a simple depression on the earth. From here, It was a cathedral. Towering walls of sandstone rose hundreds of feet in the air, striated with bands of vermilion, rust, and cream. At the bottom, a stream wound its way through the stone like a ribbon of liquid turquoise, feeding patches of cottonwood and willow that exploded in shocked bursts of green against the red desert. "It looks like a wound," Evelyn whispered, "but a beautiful one." "It is not a wound," Talon corrected her gently. "It is a spine. To my people, the canyon is a sleeping dragon that protects the water. The stream is its blood. If the iron snake your railroad cuts through here, it breaks the spine. The water will die. The dragon will wake in anger." Evelyn looked at the narrowest point of the canyon, exactly where Silas Crowell wanted to lay his tracks. It was the perfect engineering shortcut. She realized with a sinking heart. It was also the heart of the beauty before her. "Come," Talon said, turning back to the horses. "You have seen the land. Now you must see the people." The ride down the switchback trail was terrifying, but Talon guided her horse with a patience he had not shown the day before. As they descended, the silence of the high desert gave way to the sounds of life, the bleating of sheep, the rhythmic thumping of a loom, and the high-pitched laughter of children echoed off the canyon walls. The Navajo summer camp was a cluster of Hogan's domed structures made of wood and packed earth nestled in a grove of cottonwoods near the stream. As Talon and Evelyn rode in, the laughter died. Women looked up from their cooking fires, their faces tightening. Men stopped sharpening tools, their eyes tracking Evelyn with a mixture of suspicion and open hostility. She felt the weight of her white skin, her foreign clothes, her very existence as an intruder. To them, she was not Evelyn Reed. She was a harbinger of the soldiers and the surveyors. Talon dismounted and signaled for her to do the same. He walked straight to the largest hogan, where an old woman sat on a sheepskin rug, grinding corn in a stone metate. Her hair was silver, tied back in a traditional bun wrapped in white yarn, and her face was a map of every winter she had survived. "Grandmother," Talon said in his own language, then switched to English for Evelyn's benefit. "I have brought the woman." Grandmother Nata stopped grinding. She wiped her hands on her skirt and looked up. Her eyes were milky with age, but they held a terrifying clarity. She stared at Evelyn for a long time, the silence stretching until Evelyn felt the urge to fidget. "She is thin," Nata said finally, her voice sounding like dry husks rubbing together. "The wind will blow her away." "She survived the storm in the canyon," Talon said. Nata hummed, a low sound in her throat. She beckoned Evelyn closer. "Come here, girl from the east." Evelyn stepped forward, kneeling on the hard earth to be at eye level with the elder. Nata reached out, her fingers rough and warm, and traced the line of Evelyn's jaw, then touched the skin beneath her eyes. "They say you come to sell the bones of the mountain," Nata said. "I came to see my inheritance," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling slightly but holding steady. "I did not know it was someone else's home." Nata stared into Evelyn's eyes, searching deep. After a moment, the old woman sat back and shook her head, a small smile cracking the stern lines of her face. "Her eyes do not lie," Nata said to Talon. "They are clear water, but her heart is a lost bird. It does not know which tree is safe." Talon looked at Evelyn, and for a second, she saw a flicker of agreement in his gaze. "Sit," Nata commanded. "Eat. You cannot think with an empty belly." The afternoon passed in a blur of sensory overload. Evelyn, determined not to be the useless white ornament the tribe expected, tried to make herself small and observant. She watched the women weaving rugs with patterns so complex it made her head spin. She listened to the men singing low, rhythmic songs as they tended to the horses. It was a world of order, discipline, and profound connection to the earth, a stark contrast to the chaotic, smoky streets of Boston or the greed-driven hustle of Dust Mesa. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the canyon rim, Grandmother Nata called Evelyn back. She pulled a folded piece of parchment from a leather pouch. The man with the snake smiled. Nata said, "Crowell. He gave this to my husband 5 winters ago, before the sickness took him." Evelyn unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten agreement, signed by Silas Crowell and witnessed by a territorial judge. In it, Crowell promised that the railroad expansion would respect the boundaries of the Red Rock Canyon and the water rights of the local families. In exchange for right-of-way through the northern pass, he signed this, Evelyn whispered, anger heating her blood. He promised to leave this land alone. He uses words like traps, Talon said, stepping up behind her. See here, subject to federal revision, and here, pending resource allocation. He promised us safety, but he left a back door open for himself. Now he says the land is yours, so the promise to us is dead. Evelyn looked at the signature bold, arrogant, the same hand that had offered her $500 and a ticket home. Silas Crowell didn't just want to buy her land. He wanted to use her to erase his own lies. He wanted to pit a naive white woman against a tribe so he could sweep up the pieces. Talon watched her face darken. You see the trap now, he said quietly. You can still leave. Evelyn, you can sell. Take the money. Go back to your city of stone houses. You owe us nothing. This is not your fight. Evelyn looked from the paper to the Hogans, to the children playing by the stream, and finally to Talon's guarded face. She thought of her father, a man who printed the truth even when it cost him customers. She thought of the freedom she had sought, realizing that freedom built on someone else's destruction was just another kind of cage. I owe it to myself, Evelyn said, folding the paper with a sharp crease. I owe it to myself not to close my eyes. If I run now, I will never stop running. Talon nodded. A single, sharp motion. It was not a smile, but the wall between them lowered an inch. Then do not run. The sun lowered, casting long, violet shadows across the camp. The air grew cooler, signaling the coming desert night. Evelyn, feeling the need to be useful, joined a group of women near the communal fire who were preparing the evening meal. Her silk dress was torn and dusty, entirely unsuited for kneading dough or stoking fires. One of the younger women, looking at Evelyn's attire with pity, handed her a rough apron made of tanned hide. It was simple, tied with leather thongs at the waist and neck. Evelyn gratefully pulled it on over her dress, protecting the last shreds of her dignity. She stood by a flat stone heated over coals, trying to mimic the hand motions of the woman next to her, patting blue cornmeal batter into round cakes. It was harder than it looked. The dough was sticky, and the heat from the fire was intense. Talon was nearby, checking the hooves of his horse, but Evelyn could feel his eyes on her. He was always watching, assessing. Suddenly, a gust of wind roared down the canyon, a common occurrence as the temperature shifted. It was a playful, violent burst of air that kicked up dust and leaves. The wind caught the edge of the leather apron, the knot Evelyn had tied at her waist. Clumsy and unfamiliar with the stiff material, gave way instantly. The apron blew open and upward, flapping wildly like a broken wing. At the same moment, the gust pressed her lightweight dress against her legs and lifted the hem high, exposing her ankles, her calves, and the pale skin of her knee. In Boston, this would have been a catastrophe. A woman's ankle was a secret. Her knee was a myth. Evelyn gasped, dropping the dough, her hands flying down to wrestle the leather and the fabric back into place. She stumbled backward, off balance, her heel catching on a root. She tipped dangerously toward the hot coals of the fire pit. A hand shot out, gripping her arm. Another arm wrapped firmly around her waist, hauling her back from the heat. Evelyn slammed into a hard chest. She looked up, breathless, her face burning hotter than the fire. Talon had caught her. He held her steady. His hand splayed across the small of her back, pressing against the thin fabric of her dress. The leather apron was trapped between them, crinkling softly. For a moment, neither of them moved. Evelyn could feel the heat radiating from him, the solid, unyielding strength of a warrior's body. She was acutely aware of her exposed legs, of the way her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Talon looked down at her, the stoic mask he wore so well cracked. His eyes crinkled at the corners, and a low, Rich sound rumbled in his chest. He laughed. It was not a mocking sound. It was warm, genuine, and devastatingly attractive. "Even the wind is impatient," Talon said, his voice dropping an octave, intimate enough that only she could hear over the crackling fire. "It unties your apron with ease. Perhaps nature wants me to have you, too." Evelyn's breath hitched. The comment was bold, bordering on scandalous. Yet there was no lewdness in his gaze, only a sparkling, masculine appreciation. He was teasing her, pulling her into the joke rather than making her the butt of it. She felt a flush that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the man holding her. She pulled back slightly, regaining her balance but not breaking his gaze. She lifted her chin, summoning every ounce of Boston wit she possessed. "Nature," Evelyn said, her voice breathless but firm. "We'll have to learn to ask permission first." Talon's grin widened, revealing a flash of white teeth. He slowly released her waist, letting his hands linger for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "Nature is not known for its manners, Evelyn, but I am a patient man." He stepped back, giving her space to retire the apron. Evelyn's fingers fumbled with the leather thongs, her hands shaking. She tied a double knot this time, pulling it tight with a sharp tug. "See that you remain patient," she murmured, turning back to the corn cakes to hide the scarlet color of her cheeks. Behind her. She heard Talon chuckle softly before walking away. The dynamic had shifted. The air between them was no longer filled just with cultural tension. It was charged with something else, something electric and dangerous. Night fell heavy and star-bright. The canyon turned into a world of silver shadows and ink-black recesses. Evelyn lay on a pile of sheepskins inside Nada's hogan, but sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the phantom pressure of Talon's hand on her waist and heard his laugh vibrating through her. From somewhere outside, the sound of music drifted in. It was strange, rhythmic, a single string being plucked and manipulated by breath. It was a mouth bow. The sound was lonely and haunting, mimicking the wind that had played tricks on her earlier. She knew, with absolute certainty, that it was Talon playing. She wasn't the only one awake. As she lay there, she heard the low murmurs of men talking outside the hogan walls. They spoke in Navajo, but the tone was sharp, edged with resentment. She caught a few words she had picked up during the day. "Yazi, Bilagana white person, dog. He brings the snake into the nest," a young voice hissed. "He looks at her too much. The army scout has forgotten who he is. He thinks he can tame the white woman," another voice replied, dripping with scorn. "But she will bite. They always bite." Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut. The romantic haze of the afternoon evaporated. She was a danger to him. Her presence here was driving a wedge between Talon and his own people. He was protecting her. Yes, but at what cost to his standing in the tribe? The next 3 days were a trial by fire. "If you are to stay," Talon told her the next morning, his face back to its stony impassivity. "You cannot be a burden. If Silas returns, I cannot spend the battle pulling you out of ravines." "I do not intend to be pulled," Evelyn retorted, though her muscles still ached from the fall. He handed her a Colt revolver. It was heavy, greasy, and smelled of spent powder. "Show me." They went to a dry wash away from the camp. Talon set up targets, dried gourds balanced on rocks. "Shoot," he commanded. Evelyn raised the gun with one hand, closed her eyes, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The bullet kicked up dust 10 feet to her left. Talon sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of suffering. He stepped in behind her. "Open your eyes. Use 2 hands. You are not dueling a gentleman at dawn." He adjusted her stance, his hands firm on her shoulders, correcting the curve of her spine. He moved her arms, bringing the gun up to eye level. "Do not fight the gun. Let it jump. You just hold the line." His chest was pressed lightly against her back. Evelyn focused intently on the gourd, trying to ignore the heat radiating from him. She fired again. The gourd remained untouched, but she hit the rock it was sitting on. "Better," Talon said. "Again." By the second day, her hands were blistered, but she shattered a gourd at 20 paces. Talon gave a curt nod of approval that felt more rewarding than any applause she had ever received in a drawing room. Then came the horse. "Not that one," Talon said when she reached for the gelding Silas had rented for her. He pointed to a Mustang mare with a coat like spilled milk and eyes that rolled wild. "That one." "She looks insane," Evelyn stated. "She is spirited," Talon corrected. "Like you. If you can ride her, you can ride anything." The lessons were grueling. Evelyn fell off 4 times in the first hour. Her dress was ruined beyond repair, stained with red dirt and sweat. Her hair came loose from its pins, hanging in a tangled mane down her back. But she got back up, every single time. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she managed to stay seated as the mare broke into a gallop across the canyon floor. The wind whipped her face, tearing the breath from her lungs. She felt the power of the animal beneath her, the rhythm of its hooves drumming into her own bones. She pulled the mare to a halt near where Talon was waiting. Her chest was heaving, her legs trembling with exhaustion, but she was grinning a wide, unladylike grin that showed all her teeth. Talon looked up at her, shielding his eyes from the sun. The skepticism that had lived in his expression was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering intensity. "You ride well, Evelyn Reed," he said softly. Evelyn slid down from the horse, her legs nearly giving out. Talon caught her arm to steady her. They stood close, covered in dust, smelling of horse and sage and sweat. "I had a good teacher," she said, her voice husky. Talon looked at her mouth, then up to her eyes. The memory of the apron incident hung between them. The unspoken, "Nature wants me to have you," vibrating in the air. He raised a hand, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His thumb grazed her skin, rough against smooth. "The teacher is learning, too," Talon murmured. He dropped his hand and stepped back before the moment could consume them both. But as they walked back to camp, leading the horses, the distance between them felt negligible. They were no longer just a white woman and a Navajo warrior. They were allies, forged in dust and sweat, preparing for a war that was coming faster than they knew. And beneath the fear of the looming battle, a different kind of fire was beginning to burn, one that threatened to consume them both if they weren't careful. Or perhaps, Evelyn thought, stealing a glance at Talon's profile, perhaps they were already burning. The return to Dust Mesa was not the triumphant procession Evelyn Reed might have imagined in her youth. It was a gauntlet. As she and Talon rode down the main street, the very air seemed to thicken with judgment. The midday sun beat down on the wooden storefronts, exposing the peeling paint and the layers of grime, just as the eyes of the townspeople seemed intent on stripping away Evelyn's dignity. They rode side by side, a scandalous proximity in the eyes of the onlookers. Evelyn sat tall on the Mustang mare, her hair braided in the Navajo style, her silk dress stained with red clay. Beside her, Talon looked straight ahead, his face a mask of indifference, though his hand hovered near the rifle scabbard at his knee. Silas Crowell was waiting on the porch of the hotel, as if he had been tipped off by the very wind. He descended the steps, his face arranging itself into a portrait of relief and concern that made Evelyn's stomach turn. "Miss Reed," Silas called out, his voice projecting clearly to the gathering crowd. "Thank heavens, we feared the worst. We thought you had been dragged off to the wilderness to perish." He moved to help her dismount, but Evelyn slid from the saddle before he could touch her. She landed steadily, her boots kicking up a small cloud of dust. "I was not dragged. Mr. Crowell, I was guided." Silas's eyes flicked to Talon, cold and sharp as a skinning knife, before returning to Evelyn with a pitying warmth. "Guided, my dear woman. You have been out there for 3 days with a savage. You are confused. It is the sun, surely, or the shock." He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "See what these people do? They prey on the innocent. They confuse the mind." "He saved my life," Evelyn said, her voice rising. "After your men attacked us." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Silas shook his head sadly. dismissing her accusation as the ramblings of a hysterical woman. "The heat has made you delirious, Miss Reed. But you are safe now. Sheriff Harlan, a man with a thick mustache and a spine that bent whichever way Silas Crowell's money blew, stepped forward. He placed a hand on his gun belt, blocking Talon's path. "I will take it from here. Boy!" The sheriff spat at Talon. "You get back to the reservation before I decide you violated the ordinance against vagrancy." Talon looked at the sheriff, then at Silas. "I am a free man, and she is a free woman. She is a white woman under my protection." Silas countered smoothly. "Sheriff, escort Miss Reed to her room. Make sure she is comfortable, and ensure she does not wander. She is clearly traumatized and vulnerable to undue influence." "You cannot keep me prisoner," Evelyn protested, stepping toward Talon. "It is for your own safety, ma'am," Sheriff Harlan said, grabbing her arm with a grip that was far too tight to be courteous. "Until we sort out this mess, we cannot have you running off with Indians again. It is not decent." Evelyn looked at Talon. His jaw was set so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. He could draw his weapon. She knew he was fast enough, but there were 10 guns in the crowd for every one he had. "Go," she whispered to him. "Do not die here." Talon held her gaze for a heartbeat, a silent promise passing between them. Then, he turned his horse and rode slowly out of town, his back a target that no one dared to shoot at. Yet. The rumors started before the sun had even set. Evelyn could hear them through the thin floorboards of her hotel room. "She slept in his tent," a woman's voice whispered, shrill with scandal. "Trade land for a man, that is what she did," a male voice laughed. "Virgin from the east, not anymore. I wager, once they go wild, they do not come back." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched in her lap. The sheriff had posted a deputy at the bottom of the stairs. She was trapped, not by bars, but by the suffocating weight of decency. Silas had weaponized her reputation against her. If she spoke out now, she would be dismissed as a fallen woman, her testimony tainted by her association with Talon. She paced the room, the walls feeling closer than the canyon ever had. She needed to get out. She needed to breathe. Miles away, at the edge of the Badlands, Talon faced a different kind of tribunal. He sat by a small fire, surrounded by 3 young warriors from the camp. Among them was Hastian, a man who had lost his brother during the long walk and carried hatred like a second skin. "You smell of her soap," Hastian sneered, poking the fire with a stick. "You walk between 2 paths, Talon, but your feet are getting lost. You bring the white woman to the grandmother. You show her the sacred places. Why? She holds the paper that can save the canyon," Talon said calmly. "The army respects paper. They do not respect arrows. The army respects nothing but death." Hastian stood up, his shadow stretching long against the rocks. "We should kill the railroad men, burn their tracks, make them fear the red rock. And then," Talon asked, looking up, "then they send the cavalry. Not 10 men, but 1,000. They will sweep the canyon clean. Is that what you want for Grandmother Nata, for the children? Better to die fighting than to hide behind a white woman's skirts." Hastian spat. "You have become soft. Talon, her blue eyes have made you blind." Talon stood, his movement sudden and fluid. He towered over Hastian. "My eyes are open. I see a way to win where we keep our blood inside our bodies. If you want to die, Hastian, go jump off the cliff, but do not drag the people with you." The challenge hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Hastian stared at him down, then turned and walked away into the darkness. But the division remained. Talon was alone, suspended between a town that despised him and a people who doubted him. Midnight. The town of Dust Mesa slept the uneasy sleep of the guilty. Evelyn had bribed the maid, a young Irish girl with sympathetic eyes, to lend her a kitchen apron and a shawl, wrapping the rough fabric around her distinct blue dress. She slipped out through the kitchen entrance while the deputy was busy flirting with the night clerk. She moved through the shadows of the alleyways, her heart hammering against her ribs. She made her way to the outskirts of town. to an abandoned barn that stood sagging and gray against the moonlight. The smell of old hay and dry rot filled the air. "Evelyn." The whisper came from the loft. She looked up to see Talon descending the ladder. He moved silently, like smoke. "You should not be here," he said, though his eyes devoured the sight of her. "If they catch you, if they catch me, they will just lock me up again," Evelyn said, stepping into the sliver of moonlight that cut through the open barn doors. "I could not stay there, Talon. I could not listen to their lies." "They say you are mine," Talon said, his voice devoid of humor. "They say I bought you." "Let them talk," Evelyn said fiercely. "Silas thinks he can shame me into selling. He thinks if he ruins my name, I will have no choice but to take his money and run away to start over where no one knows me." She stepped closer to him. The barn was cold, but the air between them crackled with heat. "I am not selling Talon, but I am afraid. If I keep the land, I lose my standing. I become a pariah. I betray the world I was born into." She looked at his dark eyes. "But if I sell, I betray you. I betray Nata, and I betray the woman I found out there in the canyon." Talon reached out, his hand hovering near her face before he let it drop. "You have a choice. That is more than most get." "We have a plan," Evelyn said, steadying herself. "Tomorrow, at the town meeting, I will publicly refuse Silas. I will show the treaty Nata gave me. You must bring the elders. We will force the federal agents to look at the papers. It is a dangerous path," Talon warned. "Paper is thin armor against bullets. It is all we have." A sudden gust of wind whistled through the gaps in the barn walls. It caught the loose ties of the kitchen apron Evelyn wore, the disguise she had donned to escape. The knot, hastily tied, slipped. The rough leather fell away, revealing the silk of her dress underneath, shimmering in the moonlight. Evelyn gasped, grabbing at the apron to pull it back up. She looked at Talon, expecting him to make a joke, to tease her as he had by the fire. But Talon was not laughing. He looked at the apron in her hands, then at her face, the memory of his words. "Nature wants me to have you hung between them." But the playfulness was gone, replaced by a raw, aching gravity. "The wind again," Talon murmured. He stepped closer, invading her space, his presence overwhelming. "Nature can laugh all at once, Evelyn, but I do not want the wind to give you to me." Evelyn stopped breathing. She looked up at him, her hands still clutching the leather. "What do you want?" "I want you to choose," Talon said, his voice rough. "I want it to be your will, not the wind's, not fate. You." "I choose," Evelyn whispered. The words were barely audible, but in the silence of the barn, they sounded like a shout. Talon reached out and took the apron from her hands, dropping it to the straw-covered floor. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. His skin was rough, warm, and real. "Then let the wind watch," he said. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the polite, dry peck on the cheek she might have expected from a Boston suitor. It was a claim. It tasted of danger and desperation, of the dust of the road and the sweetness of the forbidden. Evelyn gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring herself against the storm of him. For a moment, there was no railroad, no Silas, no town filled with hate. There was only the heat of his mouth and the frantic beating of her own heart. When they broke apart, breathless, Talon rested his forehead against hers. "Go," he whispered. "Before the sun rises, tomorrow we fight." The morning brought fire, not light. Evelyn was awakened by the clanging of the fire bell. She rushed to the window of her hotel room to see a column of black smoke rising from the livery stable at the edge of town. Screams echoed from the street. "Indians! It is an Indian raid!" She threw on her clothes and ran downstairs, ignoring the protests of the clerk. The street was chaotic. Men were running with buckets, but the dry timber of the stable was already consumed. The smell of burning horsehair and wood was acrid and sickening. Sheriff Harlan stood in the center of the street, holding up a distinct arrow with black and white fletching. "Navajo, the sheriff shouted to the gathering mob. "They killed the cattle and torched the stable. Look at this arrow." "No," Evelyn said, pushing through the crowd. "That is a lie." She saw Silas Crowell standing near the sheriff, his face a mask of grim determination that did not quite reach his eyes. "I warned you," Silas said to the townspeople. "I told you they were savages. They do not want peace. They want to burn us out." "It is a trick," Evelyn shouted, grabbing the sheriff's arm. Talon would not do this. The Navajo are at their summer camp. This is staged. "Miss Reed," Silas said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are hysterical. Did you see them? No, but we saw the riders. Painted faces, whooping like demons." "Lies!" Evelyn screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of the mob. "Call the army," a man yelled. "Wipe them out. Clear the canyon," shouted another. Evelyn watched in horror as the town transformed into a weapon. Silas had played his hand perfectly. By staging a fake raid, he had justified a military response. He didn't need to buy the land anymore. He was going to conquer it. The news reached the Navajo camp within the hour. The young warriors were painting their faces, their blood boiling. "They accuse us of burning, then let us burn," Hastian shouted, brandishing a rifle. Talon rode into the camp, his horse lathered with sweat. He jumped down and shoved Hastian back. "Stop, this is what he wants. If you ride out now, you will prove him right." "They burned the stable and blamed us," Hastian snarled. "Are we to sit and wait for them to come for the Hogans? If blood spills, the railroad eats everything." Grandmother Nada's voice cuts through the noise. She stood at the entrance of her hogan, leaning heavily on a staff. "The snake wants you to bite so he can crush your head." Talon looked at his grandmother, then at the angry faces of his kin. He was torn. Every instinct in his blood screamed to fight, to defend, to ride down to Dust Mesa and put a bullet in Silas Crowell's heart. But he knew, with the cold clarity of a scout, that it would be suicide. "We wait," Talon said, his voice straining with the effort of control. "We wait for the army. We will show them the treaty." "The army is coming to kill us, not read to us," Hastian yelled. "Then I will stand between them," Talon said. The ultimatum came at noon. A messenger from Silas Crowell rode to the edge of the canyon, carrying a white flag that looked more like a shroud. He shouted the message across the ravine to where Talon and Evelyn, who had stolen a horse and fled the town during the confusion, were watching. "By order of the territorial governor and the Union Pacific Railroad," the messenger shouted, his voice thin in the vast space. "Due to the hostile acts of the local tribes, the land known as Red Rock Canyon is hereby declared a security zone. All inhabitants must vacate immediately." He paused, then added the killing blow. "Blasting for the grade will commence in 3 days. Anyone remaining in the canyon will be considered an enemy combatant. Miss Reed, your title is suspended pending investigation into your collusion with hostiles." The messenger turned and rode away. 3 days. Evelyn stood on the rim of the canyon, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Below them, the red rocks stood silent and ancient, unaware that thousands of pounds of dynamite were being carted toward them. "He is going to blow it up," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. "He does not care about the treaty. He creates the violence, then uses the violence to break the law." Talon stood beside her, checking the load in his revolver. He looked tired, but his eyes were hard as flint. "He wants a war," Talon said. "He thinks we are just obstacles, grass to be cut." He turned to Evelyn. "You should go. Evelyn, when the soldiers come, they will not care that you are white. If you stand with us, you fall with us." Evelyn looked at the man she had kissed in the barn, the man who had taught her to ride, the man who laughed at the wind. She thought of the apron, the symbol of servitude she had shed, and the freedom she had found in the dirt and the danger. "I am not going anywhere," Evelyn said. "Let them come. We have 3 days to prepare a welcome." She reached out and took his hand. Talon gripped it tight. Below them, the dragon of the canyon seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the fire. The 3rd day dawned not with the golden promise of the Arizona sun, but with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The wind, which had been a playful trickster in the canyon days before, had turned into a low, menacing growl, whipping sand against the sandstone walls until the air was thick with a copper mist. Evelyn Reed stood on a high limestone shelf overlooking the narrow neck of the Red Rock Canyon. Below, the trail narrowed significantly, creating the choke point that was both the canyon's defense and the railroad's obstacle. She wore a simple dress of gray cotton, borrowed from one of the women at the camp, and over it, the heavy leather apron was tied securely at her waist. The knot was double-tied this time, a silent testament to her resolve. Beside her stood Talon Yazzie. He had painted his face for war 2 black stripes across his cheekbones, a stark contrast to the bronze of his skin. His rifle rested easily in the crook of his arm, though his eyes were constantly scanning the horizon where the dust of the approaching caravan was already visible. Behind them, Grandmother Nata and 3 other tribal elders sat in silent vigil, while Hastian and the younger warriors were positioned invisibly among the crags and boulders of the canyon walls above. "They are heavy," Talon said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Wagons, many horses. He is bringing everything," Evelyn replied. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her hands, resting on the handle of the Colt revolver tucked into her apron sash, were steady. "He wants to finish this today. He will try," Talon corrected her. He looked at her, his dark eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "Stay behind the rock when the talking stops. Evelyn, words will not stop Lead." "I am not here to hide. Talon," she said. "I am the wall he has to break." The procession rounded the bend. It was an army in miniature. Silas Crowell rode at the front, looking less like a gentleman investor and more like a conquering general. Flanking him were Sheriff Harlan and a dozen men who wore the dusters of trail hands, but carried themselves with the predatory slouch of hired guns. Behind them, 2 heavy wagons groaned under the weight of wooden crates stamped with red warning symbols, high explosives. Silas raised a hand, halting the column 50 yards from the canyon entrance. He squinted up at the shelf where Evelyn and the Navajo group stood exposed. "Miss Reed," Silas shouted, his voice amplified by the canyon acoustics. "I see you have decided to join the squatters. This is your last chance. Come down, sign the papers, and I will ensure you are treated with leniency by the courts." Evelyn stepped forward to the very edge of the precipice. The wind tore at her skirts, but she stood rooted. "There are no papers to sign, Mr. Crowell," she shouted back. Her voice was not the polite soprano of a Boston parlor. It was stripped raw by the desert air. "And there are no squatters here, only the owners of this land." Silas laughed, a sharp bark of sound. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a sheaf of documents. "I have the deed of sale right here signed by you, dated 3 days ago. The law is on my side, my dear. You are trespassing on railroad property." "A forgery!" Evelyn yelled. She pulled a document from her own pocket, the last will and testament of her uncle, bearing the fresh wax seal of Mr. Calloway. "This is the only legal title, and I hold something else. Silas." She raised the second document, the weathered, creased treaty that Grandmother Nata had kept safe for years. "I have the treaty you signed with the Dine people 5 years ago. The one where you swore on your honor and the federal seal to protect the sanctity of the breath of the ancestors. You are not just a thief, Mr. Crowell. You are a liar who has defrauded the United States government." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. The hired men shifted in their saddles. Sheriff Harlan looked nervous, glancing at Silas. "She is hysterical," Silas snarled to the men around him, though his face had become a shade paler. "She has been brainwashed. And look," he pointed a gloved finger at the warriors barely visible on the cliffs. "She brings savages to threaten honest American workers. They attacked the town. They burned the stable." "You burned the stable," Evelyn's voice cracked with fury. "Your men put on feathers and paint and attacked your own people to start a war. I saw the boots. Silas, I saw the McClellan saddles." That struck a nerve. The murmur among the workers grew louder. Silas realized he was losing control of the narrative. The poor kidnapped white woman was destroying his carefully constructed justification for violence. His expression shifted from arrogance to cold, lethal calculation. He looked at the man to his right, a gunman with a scar running through his eyebrow, and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The gunman raised his Winchester with terrifying speed. Talon moved faster. Down, he slammed his body into Evelyn, shoving her sideways just as the crack of the rifle echoed off the canyon walls. Evelyn hit the hard stone, the breath driven from her lungs. She heard a sickening thud, the sound of a bullet striking flesh. "Talon!" she screamed. Talon stumbled back, his left shoulder exploding in a spray of red. He grunted, dropping to one knee, but he did not fall. He raised his own rifle with his good arm and fired. The gunman who had shot him fell from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. The canyon erupted. "Kill them all!" Silas screamed, wheeling his horse around as bullets began to rain down from the cliffs. "Blast the entrance, light the fuses." Hastian and the Navajo warriors unleashed a volley of fire from the high ground. The hired guns scrambled for cover behind the wagons and rocks, returning fire blindly up the slopes. The air filled with the acrid stench of black powder and the screams of panicked horses. Evelyn scrambled to Talon's side. Blood was soaking through his buckskin shirt, dark and wet. "I'm fine," he gritted out, his teeth clenched in pain. "Stay down! You are bleeding!" Evelyn cried, tearing at her apron to rip a strip of cloth from her dress underneath. "Watch the wagons!" Talon shouted, pushing her hand away. "Down below, amidst the chaos." Two of Silas's men were huddled behind the lead wagon. One of them was striking a match. He touched it to the fuse of a crate that had been pried open. The spark hissed, a serpentine line of fire racing toward the dynamite. "They are going to blow the supports," Evelyn realized with horror. If that dynamite went off where the wagon stood, it wouldn't just clear a path. It would bring the entire canyon wall down, burying the stream and the sacred petroglyphs forever. "No," Evelyn scrambled up, ignoring the bullets whizzing past like angry hornets. She grabbed a heavy rock, desperate to do something. Anything. But the distance was too great. The fuse was burning fast. Talon roared a sound of pure, primal defiance. Ignoring his shattered shoulder, he vaulted over the edge of the limestone shelf, sliding down the scree slope in a cloud of dust. He landed heavily on the canyon floor, stumbling, then sprinting toward the wagon. "Stop him!" Silas shrieked from behind a boulder. Bullets kicked up dirt around Talon's feet. He didn't weave. He didn't slow down. He ran straight for the fire. He reached the wagon just as the fuse burned within an inch of the crate. With a final, agonizing effort, Talon swung his leg, kicking the crate of dynamite with all his remaining strength. The crate flew off the back of the wagon, sailing through the air in a clumsy arc. It tumbled over the edge of the ravine, falling toward the dry riverbed below. Talon threw himself flat onto the ground. Boom! The sound was not heard so much as felt. The earth convulsed. A massive plume of fire and rock erupted from the ravine. The shockwave lifted the wagon off its wheels and threw men to the ground like rag dolls. The canyon wall above the explosion groaned, cracked, and then sheared away. Tons of red sandstone crashed down, not sealing the canyon as Silas had hoped, but creating a massive, chaotic barricade of rubble between the attackers and the inner sanctuary. The entrance was blocked, but the sacred heart of the canyon remained untouched behind the wall of debris. Dust billowed up in a choking, blinding cloud, turning the day into instant night. Talon. Evelyn slid down the slope, blind in the haze, coughing as the grit filled her throat. She could see nothing but gray swirls. She crawled over the shifting rocks, feeling her way. "Talon, answer me." Her hand touched a boot. She scrambled forward and found him lying half buried under a layer of shale. He was unmoving. "No, no, no," she sobbed, frantically digging the rocks away. She pulled him free, dragging his heavy weight into the shelter of a large boulder. He was covered in gray dust, his blood making black mud on his shirt. She pressed her ear to his chest. A heartbeat, strong, but erratic. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Did the dragon wake up?" "You woke it up," Evelyn choked out, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. She positioned herself over him, shielding his body with her own as smaller rocks continued to rain down from the unstable cliffs above. It was the cave all over again, but this time, she was the shelter. "You foolish, brave man." The shooting had stopped. The explosion had stunned everyone into silence. The dust began to settle slowly, revealing a landscape of devastation. Silas Crowell stood up from behind his cover, coughing, his fine suit ruined. He looked at the wall of rock blocking his prize, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. He drew his revolver. He saw Evelyn and Talon huddled near the base of the rubble. "You ruined it," Silas whispered, his voice trembling with rage. He walked toward them, stepping over the groaning body of one of his own men. "You ruined everything. I will kill you both. I will write the story myself. Tragic accident. Heroic investor survives Indian ambush." He raised the gun, aiming directly at Evelyn's head. Talon tried to rise, but his strength failed him. Evelyn glared at Silas, refusing to look away, shielding Talon with her body. "Drop the weapon." The command came from behind Silas, booming and authoritative. Silas froze. Through the clearing dust, the rhythmic thud of galloping hooves became audible. A column of cavalry soldiers in blue uniforms rode out of the haze, their sabers drawn, carbines leveled. Leading them was a stern-faced major with a gray mustache, riding beside him, looking terrified but determined. Was the ancient lawyer, Mr. Calloway. "Major Sterling, United States Cavalry," the officer barked. "I said drop the weapon. Crowell!" Silas spun around, wild-eyed. "Major, thank God you are here, these savages. They set off explosives. They attacked us." "I have eyes. Crowell!" Major Sterling shouted, dismounting. He walked over to the body of the gunman Talon had shot the man with the Winchester. He kicked the man's boot with the toe of his own. "Army-issue boots, stolen from Fort Defiance 2 months ago. And I see men painted like actors in a carnival show." "Mr. Calloway pointed a shaking finger at Silas. "I told you, Major." He sent a telegram claiming an uprising, but his own clerk confessed to me that he ordered the dynamite before any uprising happened. He is operating illegally on contested land. Silas looked from the major to the wall of rock, then to Evelyn. He saw the trap closing. The federal government, usually his ally, had arrived too soon, and with too much truth staring them in the face. Panic, cold and irrational, seized him. "No," Silas hissed. "It is mine. It is all mine." He lunged, not at the soldiers, but at Evelyn. He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her up from the ground, jamming the barrel of his pistol against her temple. "Back off," Silas screamed, retreating toward the edge of the ravine where the dynamite had blown away the ground. "Let us go. I will kill her. I swear I will kill her." "Silas, do not be a fool." "Mr. Calloway shouted. Talon, ignoring the screaming agony in his shoulder, forced himself to his feet. He swayed, his vision blurring, but he locked his eyes on Silas. "Let her go," Talon said. His voice was low, deathly quiet. "Stay back, Indian dog," Silas yelled, backing closer to the crumbling edge. The drop was 50 feet into jagged rocks. "I am walking out of here, and she is coming with me as insurance." Evelyn's hands clawed at Silas's arm. She felt the precipice behind them, the loose gravel slipping under their feet. Talon did not run. He moved with the stalking grace of a predator. He took a step. "I said back off." Silas pulled the hammer back. Talon threw himself forward, not at Silas, but low, aiming for his legs. The impact knocked Silas off balance. The gun fired into the air, the shot echoing harmlessly. Silas released Evelyn as he flailed for purchase. Evelyn scrambled away, rolling to safety. Talon and Silas hit the ground, rolling toward the edge. Talon's good hand clamped onto Silas's throat. Silas gouged at Talon's wound, driving his thumb into the bullet hole. Talon roared in pain but did not let go. He drove his knee into Silas's stomach, forcing the breath out of him, with a final surge of adrenaline. Talon shoved Silas backward. Silas went over the edge. He screamed. his hands scrabbling frantically at the loose dirt. He caught a gnarled juniper root protruding from the cliff face, jerking to a halt 5 feet down. He dangled there, feet kicking at empty air, staring down at the deadly drop below. Talon lay on his stomach at the edge, panting, blood dripping from his shoulder onto the red dust. He looked down at the man who had tried to erase his people. "Help me," Silas shrieked, his face white with terror. "Pull me up, please. I will give you anything, Moneyland, anything." Evelyn crawled to the edge, looking down. Her apron was torn, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes were hard. "You have nothing we want, Silas," she said. Silas looked at Talon. "You cannot kill me. The law, you talked about the law." Talon reached for the knife at his belt. Silas whimpered, screwing his eyes shut, waiting for the blade to cut the root. Talon held the knife, and then stabbed it into the earth, anchoring himself. He looked at Evelyn. "The law is a turtle." Talon grunted, pain etching lines into his face. "But today, we let the turtle bite. He did not cut the root, but he did not reach down a hand either." "Major," Talon shouted, his voice raspy. "Come get your trash." Major Sterling and 2 soldiers rushed forward. They peered over the edge at the sobbing railroad tycoon. "Hold him up," Sterling ordered with a look of disgust. "And put the irons on him. I believe the governor will want to have a very long conversation with Mr. Crowell about the misuse of federal explosives." As the soldiers dragged a weeping, broken Silas over the lip of the cliff and threw him into the dirt, Evelyn knelt beside Talon. She reached out, her hands trembling, and pressed her palm against his uninjured cheek. "You are alive. Nature is hard to kill," Talon whispered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips before his eyes rolled back and he slumped forward into the dirt, unconscious. "Medic!" Evelyn screamed, turning to the soldiers. "Get a doctor now." The sun finally broke through the haze, casting a singular, golden shaft of light onto the canyon floor. It illuminated the scene: the defeated mercenaries dropping their guns, the soldiers securing the prisoners, and in the center of it all, a white woman in a tattered leather apron, holding a fallen Navajo warrior in her arms, while the red rocks stood silent and victorious around them. The silence that followed the explosion was heavier than the roar itself. It settled over Red Rock Canyon like a physical weight, pressing down on the settling dust and the frayed nerves of everyone present. The violence had ended not with a whimper, but with the clanking of iron chains. Silas Crowell, the architect of the chaos, sat in the dirt, his fine linen suit ruined, his hands manacled behind his back. The arrogance that had carried him through boardrooms in Boston and land grabs in the territory had evaporated, leaving behind a small, trembling man who flinched every time a soldier walked past. Major Sterling stood over him, looking at the prisoner with the disdain a soldier reserves for a profiteer. "You are looking at 20 years. Crowell," the major said, his voice flat. "Fraud, inciting a riot, misuse of government ordinance, and attempted murder of a civilian." "It was self-defense," Silas croaked, though he refused to look up. "They were hostile." "Save it for the judge," Sterling snapped. He turned to his men. "Get those fake feathers off the prisoners. I want the town to see exactly who attacked them." A trough of water was brought forward. The hired gunmen, now disarmed and sullen, were forced to scrub the war paint from their faces as the red ochre and black charcoal washed away, revealing the pale, sunburned skin of drifters and outlaws. The few townsfolk who had ridden out with the sheriff watched in stunned silence. The Navajo raiding party was nothing more than a group of men bought for $10 a day and a bottle of whiskey. Sheriff Harlan stood to the side, trying to make himself invisible, but Mr. Calloway was already speaking to a lieutenant about the sheriff's complicity. The web of lies was unraveling, strand by strand. A few hundred yards away, the Army had set up a temporary field hospital, little more than a canvas tent pitched to block the wind. Inside, the air smelled of iodine, blood, and the strong tobacco smoke of the regimental surgeon. Talon sat on a crate, his shirt stripped off, revealing a torso mapped with the scars of a life lived hard. His left shoulder was a mess of torn flesh and dark blood. but the bullet had passed clean through. "Hold him steady," the doctor grunted, threading a curved needle with catgut. "This is going to bite." Evelyn stood directly in front of Talon. Her face was streaked with soot, her hair a tangled disaster, and she was still wearing the torn leather apron over her gray dress. She looked nothing like the heiress who had arrived on the stagecoach, and yet she had never looked more regal. She took Talon's good hand in hers. "Look at me," she commanded softly. "Do not look at the needle." Talon fixed his eyes on hers. His skin was pale beneath the bronze tan. Beads of sweat stood out on his forehead, but his expression remained impassive as the doctor drove the needle into the raw edge of the wound. Talon's grip on her hand tightened until his knuckles turned white, but he made no sound. Outside the tent flap, 2 young privates were standing guard. Their whispers carried clearly in the thin air. "Can you believe it?" one muttered. "A white lady holding an Indian's hand. It is unnatural." "She has gone native," the other replied with a sneer. "Ruined herself for decent society." "She has—" Evelyn stiffened, her eyes flashing with anger. She made a turn to confront them, but Talon squeezed her hand, stopping her. He leaned forward slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at the stitches. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, weak, but undeniably there. "The wind betrayed your apron," he whispered, his voice raspy with pain. "And now the bullet has betrayed my shoulder." Evelyn looked at him, startled by the jest in the middle of agony. Tears pricked her eyes not from sadness, but from a sudden, overwhelming release of tension. "We are a pair of fools," she whispered back, blinking furiously to keep the tears from falling. "Nature seems determined to strip us both bare." "Perhaps," Talon murmured, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "But we are still here, and we are here to exact our revenge on both the wind and the bullet." "Done," the doctor announced, tying off the final knot with a sharp tug. He wiped his hands on a rag, looking from Talon to Evelyn with a gaze that held curiosity rather than judgment. "Keep it clean. If it festers, you lose the arm. If you are lucky, you keep the arm and just lose the ability to lift anything heavier than a whiskey glass." "I do not drink whiskey," Talon said. Standing up, he swayed slightly, and Evelyn immediately stepped in, wrapping her arm around his waist to support him. "Lean on me," she said. "I am heavy," he warned. "I have carried heavier things today," she replied, thinking of the weight of the dynamite, the weight of the fear, and the crushing weight of the decision she had almost failed to make. They walked out of the tent into the late afternoon sun. The soldiers who had been whispering fell silent as they saw them. It was not just the scandal that silenced them. It was the look on Evelyn Reed's face. It was a look of absolute, terrifying defiance. She did not lower her head. She did not pull away. She walked beside the Navajo warrior as an equal, daring anyone to speak a word against him. By evening, the mood in Dust Mesa had shifted like the turning of the tide. The truth about the explosion had spread. The townspeople, who had been ready to lynch Talon hours ago, now gathered in small knots on the boardwalks, speaking in hushed tones. "He kicked the crate," the blacksmith was saying to a group of miners. "I saw it. The fuse was burning. If that wagon had gone up at the entrance, the shockwave would have brought half the cliff down on us. That Indian, he saved the canyon, but he saved our necks too." "And Silas," a woman added, clutching her shawl. "To think he was willing to blow us all up just to hide his paperwork. And we called him a gentleman." The prejudice that had been the bedrock of the town did not vanish in an instant. Hatred is a habit hard to break, but a crack had formed in the foundation. They had seen Evelyn Reed stand on the ridge. They had seen her choose the savage over the investor. And in the harsh, pragmatic logic of the West, courage was the only currency that truly mattered. Major Sterling convened a meeting in the dining room of the hotel, which had been commandeered as a headquarters. The table was covered with maps and the contested documents. Grandmother Nada sat at one end, looking small and frail, yet commanding the room with a silence that was louder than shouting. Evelyn sat beside her. "Mr." Calloway stood near the major, acting as legal counsel. "The railroad cannot go through the canyon. Major Sterling stated, tracing a line on the map. Not after this. The geological instability caused by the explosion makes it too risky for heavy freight. And frankly, the political fallout of desecrating a site protected by a treaty, even an obscure one, is a headache Washington does not want. They will have to route south, Mr. Calloway said, tapping a spot on the map miles away from the sacred cliffs. Through the flatlands. It will cost them an extra $50,000 in track, but it is safe. And the canyon? Evelyn asked. Who holds the title? Major Sterling looked at the papers. The fraud perpetrated by Crowell invalidates his claim. The original deed stands. Miss Reed, the land is yours. All 600 acres of it, including the pass. Evelyn let out a breath she felt she had been holding since she left Boston. However, the Major continued, the Army needs assurance. We cannot have this area becoming a flashpoint for future conflict. We need a buffer zone. I will provide it, Evelyn said clearly. The land will remain open. The Navajo people will have perpetual access to the canyon and the water. I will build a trading post near the main trail. It will serve the railroad workers from the southern route and travelers. But it will be built on my terms. A place of trade, not conquest. Grandmother Nada turned her head slowly to look at Evelyn. She reached out a wrinkled hand and covered Evelyn's. A bridge, Nada said softly. The canyon is the spine, but you are the hand that holds the two sides together? Later, as they left the hotel, Grandmother Nada pulled Evelyn aside. The old woman's eyes twinkled with a mischief that belied her age. You know, Nada whispered, leaning in close so the soldiers nearby could not hear. Before you came, the wind belonged only to us. It was our brother, our trickster. But that day by the fire, when the wind opened your apron, Evelyn blushed, the heat rising to her cheeks. Grandmother, please, Nada chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. Do not be ashamed. The wind opened your apron, yes, but your heart. It opened its chest to us. The wind knew what it was doing. You are the bridge we did not know we needed, daughter of the East, and my grandson. He has needed a bridge for a very long time. The victory, however, came with a tax. The next morning, the mail coach arrived, allowing now that the hostilities were declared over. It brought a bundle of letters for Evelyn, forwarded from Tucson. She sat on the porch of the now quiet hotel, breaking the wax seal of a letter from her aunt in Boston. My dearest Evelyn, reports have reached us of your conduct. It is the talk of the congregation. To be living among heathens, to be seen riding astride like a man, to be associating with a savage. Evelyn, you have destroyed your name. You have made yourself unmarriageable. I implore you, sell whatever rocks you have inherited and return immediately. We can perhaps send you to the countryside until the scandal fades. Do not throw your soul away for a patch of dirt. Evelyn read the letter twice. A month ago. These words would have crushed her. They would have terrified her with a threat of social exile. Now she looked at her hands. They were rough, the nails broken, stained with the red dust of the canyon. They were the hands of a woman who had dug a man out of a rock slide. They were the hands of a woman who owned land. She looked up. Across the street, Talon was checking the cinch on his horse. He moved stiffly, his arm in a sling, but he was alive. He caught her looking and held her gaze. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet, steady recognition. Evelyn folded the letter. She did not tear it up. She simply struck a match against the sole of her boot, a trick Talon had taught her, and held the flame to the corner of the expensive stationery. She watched the words unmarriageable and scandal turn to black ash and float away on the breeze. My soul is right where it belongs, she whispered to herself. It was the last night before the army was scheduled to withdraw. The air was cool and smelled of juniper smoke. Evelyn and Talon sat on a high ridge overlooking the canyon entrance. A small fire crackled between them, more for light than warmth. Below them, the scar of the explosion was visible in the moonlight, a chaotic jumble of boulders blocking the pass. But behind it, the canyon slept in peace. Talon sat with his back against a rock, his injured arm resting in the sling across his chest. He was watching Evelyn, who was staring into the flames. You got a letter, Talon said. It was not a question. I did, Evelyn replied. From your people? Yes. Talon poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. They want you back. They say this is no place for a lady. They say a lot of things, Evelyn said. Talon turned to look at her fully. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face, making him look ancient and ageless all at once. Listen to me. Evelyn, the war is over. The railroad is moving. You have your title. You can sell it now for a fair price, a high price, and go back. You can buy your silk dresses. You can sleep in a bed that does not smell of horses. He paused, his throat working as he swallowed difficult words. White people. They can always go. You have a world out there that will take you back if you wash the red dust off hard enough. I do not have that. This rock is all I have. I will not keep you here if your heart is looking east. Evelyn looked at him. She saw the fear behind the stoicism. He was offering her an out, giving her the freedom to leave him so that he wouldn't have to watch her regret staying. She scooted closer to him on the rock. The distance between them closed. I spent 24 years in Boston, Evelyn said softly. And in all that time, I never felt as clean as I do right now, covered in dust. She reached out and touched the edge of the sling, her fingers grazing the warm skin of his neck. You said once that the law comes late. Well, wisdom comes late too. I do not want the silk dresses, Talon. And I do not want a world that asks me to wash away who I have become. And who have you become? Talon asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yours, Evelyn said. If you will have me. The wind sighed through the canyon, a soft, mourning sound that turned into a caress. Evelyn was wearing the apron again, the new leather one she had made herself in the last 2 days. It was tied firmly at her waist. Talon looked down at the knot. He remembered the day by the fire, the accident, the laugh, the way the wind had made the decision for them. Nature wants me to have you. He reached out with his good hand. His fingers brushed the leather tie. He did not pull it. He did not let the wind take it. He simply rested his hand there, waiting. He looked up into her eyes, asking a silent question. Is this you? Is this real? Evelyn did not look away. She covered his hand with hers and pressed it against her waist. She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. No wind tonight, she whispered. Just us. Talon let out a ragged breath. He leaned forward, closing the final inch between them. When he kissed her, it was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled collision of the barn. It was slow, it was deep. It was a seal placed upon a promise. His hand moved to the knot. With slow, deliberate movements, he pulled the leather thong. The knot came undone, not by chance, but by intent. The apron fell away, sliding off her lap to the ground, under the vast canopy of stars, with the smell of sage and the cooling desert around them. The barriers fell away. There was no frantic tearing of clothes, only the slow, reverent coming together of two people who had found their anchor in the storm. The intimacy that followed was a quiet thing, a conversation of skin and breath, a reclaiming of the self through the giving of the self. The next morning, the town of Dust Mesa woke to the sound of bugles. The army was moving out. Silas Crowell was loaded into the back of a prison wagon, shackled to the floor. He looked old and withered, his eyes hollow. He watched the town pass by through the bars, the town he had tried to buy and burn. As the column of soldiers began to ride out, a hush fell over the main street. Riding down from the trail that led to the canyon were two figures. Talon rode on the left, his arm still in a sling, sitting tall on his stallion. Beside him, on the white Mustang mare, rode Evelyn. She wore a divided riding skirt made of buckskin and a white shirt, a silver Navajo necklace resting at her throat. They did not ride behind the soldiers. They did not ride behind the Navajos. They rode in the space between, side by side. They stopped near the general store. The shopkeeper, the same man who had once spat when Talon walked by, took off his hat. It was a small gesture, hesitant, but it was there. Sheriff Harlan, stripped of his badge by the major, watched from the shadows of the alley, powerless. Evelyn looked at the town, the dusty buildings, the faces of the people who had judged her. She did not glare. She simply looked at them with a calm, unassailable dignity. She nodded once to Mr. Calloway, who was standing on the boardwalk, beaming like a proud grandfather. Then she turned to Talon. They exchanged a look that needed no words. He touched the brim of his head, and she smiled a smile that was free of fear, free of Boston, free of everything except the present moment. They turned their horses and rode back toward the canyon, toward the trading post that would soon be built, toward the life they had carved out of the red rock. The dust swirled around the wheels of the prison wagon, carrying Silas away to the east. But for Evelyn and Talon, the dust was not an obscurement. It was the ground they stood on. The apron was untied. The knot of the past was broken, and the future lay open as the wide, blue Arizona sky. The falling action was complete. The villains were vanquished. The heroes were united, and the stage was set for the long, quiet work of building a life. Dust Mesa would go on. The railroad would be built, but the heart of the land and the hearts of the two who guarded it remained wild and unbroken. 3 years had passed since the dynamite smoke cleared from the Red Rock Canyon, and the Arizona Territory had continued its relentless march toward the 20th century. But here, where the earth bled rust and the sky stretched like an endless bolt of turquoise silk, time seemed to move differently. It did not rush, it deepened. The railroad had come, eventually. But it ran 10 miles to the south, a steel ribbon shimmering in the heat, far away from the sacred cliffs. The locomotives were distant murmurs, no louder than the wind in the slot canyons, their whistles merely a faint reminder of a world that pushed and shoved for progress. On the land that had once been a battleground, a sturdy structure of timber and adobe now stood. A sign swung above the wide porch, creaking rhythmically, Red Rock Station. It was not just a house, it was a heartbeat. It was a trading post, a stable, an eatery, and a sanctuary where the dusty trails of the white settlers crossed the ancient paths of the Navajo. Evelyn moved through the open-air kitchen of the station with a grace that would have shocked her Boston relatives. The silk dresses and whalebone corsets were long gone, repurposed or burned. In their place, she wore a skirt of durable calico and a shirt of bleached cotton, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Around her waist, a leather apron was tied, not the stiff, new hide of 3 years ago, but a piece of leather softened by oil, flour, and time, molding to her body like a second skin. "Mas café, señora?" a mule driver asked, holding out a tin cup. "Sí, un momento," Evelyn replied effortlessly, pouring the dark, steaming liquid from a speckled pot. She turned to a Navajo woman inspecting a bolt of cloth at the counter. "Yati, sister, that wool is from the north, good for winter blankets." She spoke the languages of the territory, English, Spanish, and Dine with a fluidity that blurred the lines between them. She was no longer the virgin from the east, a fragile thing to be protected or exploited. She was the mistress of the station, a woman who knew the price of silver, the mood of the weather, and the weight of a gun, though she rarely carried one these days. The sound of hoofbeats approached from the canyon trail, distinct from the plodding of the pack mules. Evelyn looked up, shielding her eyes against the midday glare. A smile, slow and radiant, spread across her face. Talon rode a tall bay stallion, leading a string of pack horses laden with woven rugs, silver jewelry, and sacks of pinon nuts. He wore a mixture of traditional velvet and practical denim, his hair tied back with a woven band. He looked older, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by the sun. But the hardness that had defined him 3 years ago had softened into a quiet, confident authority. But he was not the center of attention. Running beside the horses, laughing as he chased a lizard, was a toddler with hair like raven feathers and eyes that held the blue of the Boston Atlantic. "Mama, mama," the boy shouted, stumbling over his own feet in excitement. "Nata Yazi," Evelyn called out. Abandoning the coffee pot, she rushed down the steps, scooping the boy up into her arms. He smelled of sagebrush and horse sweat. "He refused to ride in the basket," Talon said, dismounting with a fluid grace. "He thinks he is a warrior already. He walked half the mile. He is stubborn," Evelyn said, kissing the boy's dusty cheek. "Like his father." "And loud," Talon countered, stepping onto the porch and brushing the dust from his vest. "Like his mother." They stood there for a moment in the bustling yard of the station, the white woman, the Navajo man, and the child who belonged to both. 3 years ago, their union would have been a scandal whispered behind hands in church pews. Here, in the shadow of the red cliffs, it was simply a fact. The mule drivers nodded to Talon with respect. The Navajo traders greeted Evelyn as kin. The anomaly had become the anchor. Later that afternoon, when the rush of the midday meal had subsided, Talon and Evelyn walked to the edge of the property, near the precipice where the battle had ended. There, growing out of a fissure in the rock, was a Utah juniper. It had been a sapling when the dynamite exploded, nearly crushed by falling debris. Now, it was waist-high, its trunk twisted and gnarled, its roots driving deep into the unforgiving stone to find water. Talon crouched beside it, his hand resting on the rough bark. "Look at it," he said quietly. "It does not ask the rock for permission. It just holds on." "It is stronger than the rock," Evelyn said, standing beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Because it is alive." Talon looked up at her, covering her hand with his. "Like us, we dug our roots in. Evelyn, people said the soil was too hard. They said oil and water do not mix. But look." He gestured to the station, to the boy playing with a wooden horse on the porch, to the peace of the canyon. "We are still here." "We are," Evelyn agreed. "And I think we are proving to be very difficult weeds to kill." A shadow fell over them. Grandmother Nada was approaching, leaning heavily on a willow staff. She moved slowly now, her winters heavy upon her shoulders, but her eyes were as sharp as obsidian shards. She walked past them to the main entrance of the station. Above the door, burned into the heavy cedar beam, were 3 names Evelyn Reed: Talon Yazzie, Little Nata. Grandmother Nata reached up, her trembling fingers tracing the grooves of the wood. She hummed a low note, a sound of approval. "Blood is a river," the old woman said, her voice sounding like dry leaves rustling. "It flows where it wants, but family is a stone you put in your pocket. You choose to carry it every morning." She turned to Evelyn. "My grandson was a man cut in 2, half warrior, half scout, half angry, half lost. You stitched him back together, daughter of the East, not with a needle, but with a choice. He stitched me together too, grandmother," Evelyn replied softly. "I was just a paper doll before I came here." "Paper burns," Nada said with a toothless grin. "Leather lasts." Toward evening, a stagecoach from the east pulled into the yard to water the horses. Among the passengers was a young man in a travel-stained suit, fanning himself with a bowler hat. He looked at the dust and the vastness with the same terrified awe Evelyn had once felt. He squinted at the woman commanding the station staff. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn turned, wiping her hands on her apron. She recognized him instantly. Julian Thayer. He had been a suitor of sorts in Boston, a man who discussed poetry and the price of tea with equal passionless polite manners. "It is Evelyn Yazzie now. Julian," she said, her voice steady. "But yes, it is good to see you." Julian stared at her. He took in the sun-browned skin, the silver bracelet on her wrist, the leather apron, and then he saw Talon emerge from the stable, hoisting a heavy sack of grain onto his shoulder with effortless strength. He saw the look that passed between Evelyn and the warrior, a look of intimate, unspoken communication. "Good heavens, Evelyn," Julian stammered, his face pale. "The rumors. We heard you had been taken, that you were destitute, but you are. I am home," Evelyn finished for him. She did not blush. She did not smooth her hair or apologize for her appearance. She gestured to Talon. "Julian, I would like you to meet my husband, Talon, and our son is under that table, likely trying to feed a biscuit to the dog." Julian looked from the savage he had read about in the penny dreadfuls to the woman he had once thought to marry. He expected to see shame. Instead, he saw a queen surveying her kingdom. "Your husband," Julian repeated, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "The best man I know," Evelyn said simply. "Would you like stew?" "Julian, it is 5 cents a bowl, and I promise, it has more flavor than anything at the Harvard Club." Julian sat, ate, and watched. He watched the way the Navajo traders treated Evelyn with deference. He watched the way Talon laughed with the white travelers. He watched the borders of his own world dissolve in the face of a reality that refused to fit into his boxes. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in violent shades of violet and gold, a sudden gust of wind roared down from the mesa. It was the same wild, unpredictable wind that had greeted Evelyn 3 years ago. Evelyn was near the clothesline, taking down the drying linens. The wind caught her, whipping her hair across her face. It grabbed the hem of her leather apron. The knot, old and worn from daily use, slipped. The apron flapped open, blowing back against her legs, exposing the sturdy riding skirt beneath. Talon, who was chopping wood nearby, paused. He leaned on his axe, watching the scene with a grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Nature never quits, huh?" he called out, his voice carrying over the wind. Evelyn grabbed the apron, wrestling it back into place. She looked at him, her eyes dancing with mirth. The memory of that first day, the shame, the heat, the "nature wants me to have you" hung between them. No longer a source of tension, but a cherished private joke. "Nature is persistent," Evelyn shouted back, bunching the leather in her fist. She pulled the apron off entirely and tossed it at him. "But nature wants you to have some work to do. Husband, not me. I already made my choice." Talon caught the apron with one hand, laughing a deep, rich sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "You chose the hard work, Evelyn. I chose the view," she retorted, winking at him before turning back to the laundry. It was a small moment, insignificant to the travelers watching, but for them, it was everything. The apron was untied, but the bond was iron. The wind could no longer shame her, and the world could no longer define her. That night, the air turned crisp. A large fire was built in the stone pit in front of the station. Travelers, mule drivers, and Navajo families gathered around, sharing the warmth. Julian sat on a log, mesmerizingly watching the flames. "It is incredible," he murmured. "Silas Crowell. Back east, they say he was a martyr of industry who fell victim to bad luck." Evelyn sat on a bench, little Nata asleep in her lap. Talon sat beside her, his arm resting protectively on the back of the bench. "Silas Crowell was a man who thought the earth was a ledger book," Evelyn said, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "He thought he could subtract people and add zeros and the equation would balance." She looked at the fire, her eyes reflecting the dance of the flames. "He tried to blow up the mountain to save time. He tried to start a war to steal land. He nearly destroyed us all." "But he didn't," a traveler said. "Why?" "Because the land does not belong to the one who holds the paper." Talon spoke up, his voice low and rumbling. "It belongs to the one who bleeds for it, and the one who loves it enough to let it be." Evelyn stroked her son's hair. "We learned that freedom is not just about doing what you want," she added. "It is about deciding what you will not give up. Silas gave up his humanity for iron rails. We chose to keep our souls, even if it meant standing in front of the dynamite." The circle fell silent. The story of the Red Rock Canyon was not just a tale of adventure to these people anymore. It was a lesson. It was a reminder that in this vast, terrifying, beautiful country, the greatest frontier was not the land itself, but the human heart. As the fire died down to embers, the listeners drifted away to their bedrolls and wagons. Evelyn and Talon remained, watching the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had watched over the Anasazi, the Spanish conquistadors, and now, this strange, new family. "Do you miss it?" Talon asked quietly, looking at her. "The city, the noise. I miss the libraries sometimes," Evelyn admitted. But then I look at the canyon, and I realize it has more stories than any book. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I am where I am supposed to be. And Talon said, kissing the top of her head. I'm exactly where the wind wanted me. The west was changing. The steam whistles were getting louder. The fences were getting longer. But in this corner of the Arizona territory, where a juniper tree clung to the rock and a child dreamed in 2 languages, the spirit of the land remained untamed. It was a place where a woman could untie her apron and find her strength, and a warrior could lay down his rifle and find his home. Freedom, Evelyn realized as she closed her eyes, was not a gift you were given. It was a thing you built, stone by stone, choice by choice, love by love. And she had built a fortress that no wind could ever blow down. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Evelyn and Talon through the windswept canyons of Arizona. If this story touched you, or if you have your own thoughts about the choices we make and the freedoms we fight for, please leave a comment below. I would love to know where you are listening from. Let's see how far this story has traveled around the world. Please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, for more stories of adventure, romance, and the rugged spirit of the frontier. Don't forget to hit the like button and press the hype button to help this video reach more listeners. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these campfire stories alive. Thank you, and happy trails.